All right. Welcome back to the Coughy podcast, episode 4. I'm David, your co-host.
And I'm Alyssa. Don't forget to like us on all of our social media and share this video to add subscribers.
Yeah, if you're on YouTube, go ahead and hit that little bell at the bottom so you don't miss a single update. Again, here, episode 4, we are with Emmett with Genesis Farms, and another banging episode. I'm excited to introduce you to this guy and, get into what Genesis Farms and Emmett is all about. So, Mr. Emmett, would you like to introduce yourself to everybody?
Absolutely. Thanks for having me on the Coffee House. First, I'm very excited about this new podcast for our community. I think the more conversations we have, the better. And ultimately, patients need access to good information. So that's why I wanted to be on here today, and just want to thank both of you for that opportunity. So I'm the operating officer for Genesis Farms. I helped start the company about 1.5 years ago with 3 founders who are local business people from South Dakota, 2 from Rapid City, 1 from Sioux Falls, and then myself as the manager on the ground. And all of us are from South Dakota. We take a lot of pride in being 100% locally owned and operated. Hence the reason our tagline is South Dakota's Homegrown Cannabis Company. We're also home growers and activists and patients before going into the commercial space. And so we want to keep that spirit alive. My story goes way back, long before Genesis, of course. I've been an advocate for 12 years now. It's pretty much been my life's purpose. When I was 18 years old, I went to the state capitol to share my own story with my own family member that benefited from medical cannabis during cancer treatment. And I helped bring some MS patients to the capitol. And it quickly turned into a job, more or less, or effort. I started gathering petition signatures to put medical marijuana on the ballot in 2010. It did not pass that year. So I ended up leaving South Dakota. I spent most of the last decade in Colorado and Nevada and working around the country. First, mostly as an advocate and working on campaigns and as a lobbyist. And then about 6 or 7 years ago, I started getting involved in the industry when I got a job with Denver Relief Consulting, mostly as a researcher and an assistant to other consultants. But they trained me on all aspects of the business. I got to go into countless facilities in several different states, and it just took off from there. Honestly, I didn't realize I'd be spending my entire life working on cannabis, but that's kind of what happened. And so after the election in 2020, when South Dakota voters passed both medical and adult use legalization, I moved back. Just a couple months later, I went straight to the Capitol because I knew there'd be a lot of questions and a lot of work on how to implement these new laws. And my thought was I could bring my experience back home and try to help the state. I did a little bit of consulting, and shortly after the 2021 legislative session, I met with the founders of Genesis and decided to go all in with Genesis, and I've been on Team Genesis ever since. So that's me in a nutshell. And right now I'm overseeing all of our operations. So that's cultivation, manufacturing, and retail, and also juggling that with ongoing advocacy and lobbying, which I know we're going to talk about today as well.
We're going to get into the legislation part, especially with your background, being on the Capitol multiple times and being an advocate for the people in multiple states. So I kind of want to start with the 2 that were shut down yesterday regarding, the patient relationship with the doctor. I think that one alone was huge because it would make it already harder than it is now for people to get cards. I don't think that people, I honestly just think it should be left alone. There should be a governing body. But I think that we should be able to figure out what works for us. And no laws are being broken. People are getting the medicine that they need. And I don't really see a negative to what Mr. Deutsch was, writing the bill for it, I would say. So I'm glad that it got turned down pretty easily. And I just kind of want to get your thoughts on those 2, and then everything else that is being typed up and being voted on right now.
Yeah, it was definitely an accomplishment to see those bills get defeated in the Senate committee, I believe it was, the Senate Health Committee. It's a good reminder that if we don't show up and fight back, bad ideas can gain traction, because those bills did pass the House. Those bills did have some momentum, and really it's about public perception for me. Unfortunately, there are folks who really are prohibitionists. The prime sponsor of those bills, Representative Deutsch, has been politically active year round in fighting us politically. So he is just fundamentally opposed to, cannabis use, I think, as a whole, or believes that medical limit, and that right now medical is being used as a loophole for recreational. And we obviously all know that's not true. Anyone who knows someone that's suffering, that's trying to get a card, it's a lot of work. You have to jump through some hoops. You got to know the right people. You have to be able to use a computer. It's all online. And so we went into the legislative session with the mindset that access is an urgent issue right now. We should not be talking about limiting access any further. We should be talking about opening up access. And the ironic thing is that South Dakota is actually a leader in healthcare access and innovation. We're one of the leading states with telehealth on a number of things. We're one of the leading states with mobile clinics that go to rural communities and provide healthcare out of, vehicles, vans or RVs, essentially, or these satellite clinics. And so we thought medical cannabis was being unfairly targeted. And you're right, David, when you mentioned about, following the law. I am unaware of a single case of a practitioner going to the medical board, getting disciplinary action, losing their license. We just haven't heard of those issues. Where the issues really are is with the practitioners' employers. Some of these large healthcare providers will say, their official policy is, yes, we're leaving it up to the docs. But we're hearing from patients that when they talk to their docs are really strongly discouraged. They're not given the right information. So we're seeing a lot of independent doctors, and that's not uncommon in other states. Medical cannabis is not your institutional medicine that comes from big pharma, which is intertwined with healthcare providers. So you do see kind of an independent approach to it, and maybe practitioners that focus on it. And I think that's a good thing. I'd rather go to a practitioner who knows what they're talking about, who understands that medical cannabis isn't for everyone, actually. These providers aren't just going to hand you a card. I know patients that have gone in with their medical records. They get asked a lot of questions, and they'll say, I wasn't expecting, I didn't realize, with bipolar and schizophrenia that there's risks, right? And I've heard of some doctors even asking their patients to sign commitment forms that they're not going to drive under the influence, that they'll leave their product in a locked box at home. And so I'm pretty proud of the community. There are lawmakers that have agendas that want to say there's a problem when there isn't one. And that's why we saw these bills. But I am very glad that the bills died in that committee. That doesn't mean the attacks are over. And it doesn't mean those bills are necessarily completely dead. They could be what's called smoked out on the Senate floor. Probably not likely. They probably are done for the year. But just to put this in context too, the last two legislative sessions, I think we tracked more than 50 bills, the vast majority of which were attacks. And thankfully, because of our lobbyists and the grassroots in the past couple of years, we've actually largely protected the program. 2 years ago, the first session after IM 26 went into effect, the governor actually proposed complete repeal of the medical law and to replace it with a committee that would be all people appointed by her that would rewrite what their version of medical marijuana is. And we heard that was probably going to be like Minnesota. It's going to be very pharmaceutical, pills and tinctures only, just leaving a majority of patients out. And that's not what South Dakotans voted for. But after we fought back and after a couple of years has gone by now and the program is up and running, while there are still some bad bills that get proposed, actually a lot of the legislators are on our side now in terms of let's just keep the program going. We're not really getting much for good luck with like proactively expanding the program. I tried to bring a bill to allow telehealth exams and to also fix the reciprocity issue with out-of-state cards. We just didn't have the votes. Leadership did not want to take up the issues. They said we had way too many marijuana issues last year. Can we take a break this year? So we really did not accomplish anything in terms of improving the program. But right now we're just trying to prevent any negative or more restrictions adding to the program. So it's kind of a neutral outcome, I think, at the end of this session.
Yeah. For me personally, like, this is a huge win. It's super exciting that these two bills didn't pass. The things that they're focusing on, in my opinion, are the wrong things, right? Like, what they should be focusing on is, you know, doctors who don't require medical records or, you know, things like that, not focusing on, you know, taking away access or like not allowing practitioners to travel to people who have chronic conditions to certify them. Like that, come on, you know, you're taking access completely away from so many people by doing that. And personally, like, with the telehealth part, like that they were talking about, you know, offering telehealth and all that, nobody's doing that. So I'm not exactly sure where they got that unless they're mixing up like Flandreau FSST with the South Dakota program or what.
Oh.
Yeah.
Strip clubs, apparently. I had no idea. And it was funny how a news reporter basically called him out on Twitter and said, can you name a single example of this in a strip club? And he goes, just Google it. And no, you can't find it online. So yes, they make pretty bad arguments.
Nothing new about that.
One just really got me.
Well, okay, so going off the telehealth thing, yes, it is not available right now in the state, which is kind of asinine when you think about what Emmett said a minute ago, with South Dakota being one of the leading states when it comes to telehealth, when it comes to everything else, right? So if you think of the state of South Dakota in comparison to any other state, we are one of the more rural states when it comes to the location of where we're at, and the majority of the population does not live in a major city. And they might not have access to a doctor who is willing to write a prescription card, or I shouldn't say that, because a lot of doctors are willing to, but behind closed doors, those institutions are saying, no, we're not going to do it. Publicly, we're going to say, yes, we're leaving it up to the doctors, but we're going to discourage them not to do it. And I had a conversation with the doctor at Stanford, my primary care, and he was like, I mean, technically, they said that we were able to, but I want to make sure I have a job next week, is literally what he said, and left it at that. And I was like, so, and I kind of poked a little bit more for some questions, you know, being me, but I didn't really get much more information out of that. So that's kind of scary that it's like, yeah, we're being told, you know, you can go to your doctor and they'll know everything about it. You know, first of all, 90% of the doctors that are going to be your primary care or aren't for special things. If you have to have an eye surgery, you get referred to an eye specialist. If you have to have a dental surgery, you get referred to a specialist. Like, so why isn't there doctors who could be third-party people who are versed when it comes to medical cannabis and can go through your medical records and say, you know what, this will work for you, or should work for you, or could work for you. This probably isn't a good idea because you have some type of condition that could be seen as a risk, like you mentioned earlier, schizophrenia and bipolar. I don't understand how you can have all of these specialized doctors and nurses and whatever else when it comes to everything else, but when it comes to cannabis, you want the people who are being told not to give cards be the sole party responsible for giving cards. And then also, a lot of people don't even have primary care. So the whole referral process is such a gray area. So that was the biggest one that I was happy that didn't pass, because like I said, that would have been detrimental to a lot of patients, especially with renewal coming up. Who knows what that would have looked like if that were to go in place. Going through the list though, I found a couple other crazy ones. So
actually, before we move on, I actually have a story about like talking to your primary care doctor about medical marijuana. So I actually, like, I did do that, and I did talk to my doctor about it. And guess what? On my medical records now, it has marijuana abuse listed on there.
Oh.
So they took me asking for medicine and they turned it into drug abuse. So now on my medical records, it says marijuana abuse. Like, that's exactly what's not supposed to happen.
When I had my back surgery, before I had my first back surgery, they asked me like, "Hey, do you do any drugs? Whatever the case may be, from A to Z." And I was like, "Yeah." I mean, I've always been honest with my doctor. Whether I was smoking cigarettes back in the day or whatever else, I was always honest. Because I mean, how are you going to get care from somebody if they don't know what they're doing? Like, if they don't know what they're going into. And so they asked me like, "Hey, how do you like cope with the pain because of your back?" Like, I have disc degeneration disease. And I was like, "Well, I consume cannabis, especially at night. And a lot of it is topical based or like a joint at night before bed, so that way I can fall asleep and stay asleep." And they took note of that. And so after my surgery, they gave me naproxen, which is the same chemical that's in Advil. So it was like 300, 400 milligram strength Advil. When they cut me open in the front from like my chest to my belly button and 4 incisions in my back, but yet here's some Tylenol because you said you smoked weed at home. Like, so my record says the same thing, marijuana.
And keep in mind, drugs like Advil and Tylenol, which are available over the counter, are related to about 500 deaths per year, while cannabis is 0. And so we have to jump through all these hoops. We're the only patients. This is the only medicine. You have to register with the state and get a special permission slip before you can even go buy it. But yet, there are still hundreds of medical options over the counter. Nobody verifies anything. We trust people. And unfortunately, some people do make the wrong decision and get hurt. And that goes with marijuana too. There's responsibility involved, and that's on all of us. But I'm pretty, happy with the practitioners who have made the effort to make this program work. Last time I checked, I think there was over 200 or something like that registered with the state. We're almost up to 8,000 patients. So slow and painful, but we're getting there.
Right, absolutely. We just need to get rid of that stigma, man. Being where we're at doesn't really help, but I think we just need to get people educated. And even like Mr. Deutsch, if he's so close-minded on it, I think he needs to hear some patient stories, hear some stuff from people that are like him, from, someone's grandma, or, saying, "Oh, this helps my muscle atrophy," or whatever the case may be. It doesn't even have to be somebody who's like, "Yeah, I smoke weed every day." It could be somebody who like, I eat one gummy before I go to sleep, and it's helped my PTSD or whatever the Crohn's disease. Like, he needs to hear that, and not just him, but a lot of people that are close-minded, because a lot of the stuff that comes from them is hearsay. Like, those aren't personal opinions from things that they've experienced. They don't go into a dispensary and talk to people. They look up, "Oh, weed is bad and weed is devil's lettuce, so let's ban it. Protect the children."
The devil's lettuce.
It's crazy.
Well, they're outnumbered at least. We got to keep reminding them too. 70% of South Dakotans supported medical marijuana, not because 70% of South Dakotans want to smoke weed. That's because most people know somebody that's in pain and may benefit, may or may not, but they want to have the options available for them.
Absolutely. And it wasn't like 3 years ago, something like 56% voted for rec too, but we won't talk about that today.
Well, actually, one of the people who was, I can't remember which person it was, but somebody who was against the program and wanted these bills to pass, like, they stood up and they were talking, and they literally said, "The people voted for medical marijuana. They did not vote for recreational. This is not what they want." What are you talking about, dude? Like, yes, we did vote for recreational, and it did pass. So, like, what? Like, I was a little bit taken aback by that statement. Like, what? Hold on a second.
My favorite statement that he made was the whole discount thing, like BOGO or buy one get one half off. How is that medicine? How is it medicine for you to bring another person who has chronic pain and needs help getting to like leadership or direction to, like, how is that medicine? Okay, I literally during the Super Bowl I watched 13 different big pharma commercials And again, like I've mentioned in another episode, like at the end, it's like may cost blah 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 blah, and it's crazy how we can promote that. We can promote alcohol, we can promote tobacco, we can promote everything else. But when it comes to something that's natural, grows from the earth, and helps people, like it's the end of the world. I don't understand it.
So,
How is that
Emmett,
medicine?
do you think Genesis, like, are you guys gonna make the migration over to Twitter now that you can advertise on there?
I'm not sure yet. We haven't been too active on social media. As you know, I've been so focused on just growing plants and getting the facility up and running. We do have a marketing director that is working on some pretty cool brands that we're going to launch later this year. So I'm sure we'll have some social media and an online presence with that. But I'm terrible at social media, so I'm not the one.
Well,
I don't know about that. You're pretty
Well, I
good.
just
My
think,
Instagram got hacked. I clicked the link and my Instagram got hacked, so I don't trust any of it now.
Okay.
well, I just think
You know,
interesting that the state legislature is like introducing bills that restrict advertising, that type of thing. There's no way in a million, zillion, gajillion years that they could ever police Twitter or like the internet, people advertising online. Like, there's no way. I'm sorry, state government, but there's no
Yep.
way that you could ever do that in a bajillion, zillion years. Like the content of a lot of like this digital stuff is so over their heads that they don't even understand it. So there's just, it's insane, I guess, to me to think that like that they would even think about trying to like regulate any of that.
I think the whole concept of medical cannabis is over a lot of people's in power's head, I guess.
yep.
However you want to say that. But when speaking of building a social media presence, you guys are opening Sioux Falls soon, maybe?
Not yet. So we have not made any public announcements yet. So I guess you'll be the first to know right now.
Ooh.
I've been cautious to put any announcement dates out there because I want to make sure everything is perfect and ready before we get to that point. But we are looking at the middle of May right now for several locations across the state. It's really timed up with our wholesale operation, which is very sophisticated. We're doing this right. It's at a scale that has taken a little bit longer than other folks. But what's good about that is at our scale, we can offer products more affordably than anyone else. I'm really confident we're going to beat everyone on pricing and quality and variety. And those are kind of the three things I think as a business we have to hit to be successful. But I think patients will appreciate that. And I think other companies too are going to have their genetics and strains, and patients, I encourage them to try everything. I don't think it's really a cutthroat competition, but it is survival mode at the same time. And we have to do what we need to do to be successful. And so anyways, it's been a lot of work and planning to lead up to that launch. At the retail level, we do have a limited supply of products available right now in 5 or 6 dispensaries across the state from our first harvest, which was really just our effort to get product to market as soon as possible, affordably. But our first indoor harvest is coming up in April, which shortly after our lab and our manufacturing will be up and running. So we'll be able to make every type of product. I want to do tinctures. I want to do edibles. I want to do vapes, every type of concentrate. And our goal is to have a full menu there in the middle of May when we open in Sioux Falls, Rapid City, Aberdeen, Mitchell, Yankton, and Pierre.
You heard it here first, folks. That is a huge announcement. Man, that's interesting. Because like you said, you haven't said anything about it. A lot of people have been wondering. We can see we got the list. Like, all right, Genesis Farms is on there. When I see some of the stuff hitting the shelves a little bit, but when are they going to open their stuff? When are they going to take advantage of their own licenses? That's huge, man. That's
It's coming. And at that time, too, once the business is up and running, I hope to also be more involved in education. So even though advertising is really regulated, nobody can regulate education. If they try, we're going to fight back. Education is paramount. So I believe, we can form a nonprofit and team up with other people and do educational events, educational billboards, an educational website. Just help people with the basics. I had my own family member I talked to recently who still thought the only way you could use marijuana is smoking it. And she thought when you vape it, that's mixed with tobacco. And they're seeing this, some stuff being sold at smoke shops now. So there's some confusion with the older generations. And we got to get that education out there and explain that there's ways you can dose this. There's other ways you can consume it. And we can find what works for you.
I'm a younger people, and it still confuses me, like the Delta 8,
Yep.
Delta 10, all of that. Like there's a lot that goes into all of the things.
It is
right?
a lot.
Yeah, like right now, THC percentage is the big thing, right?
Yep.
But as I've found out as we've gone, that doesn't matter that much, and I had no idea.
Mm-hmm.
So this whole process for me specifically has been very educational, because I had absolutely no idea even what tinctures were before last August. Like I didn't even know what that was. So
Now
we're
look
moving
at
in
you.
the right direction.
Now look at you. You made some progress. No, I'm going off like the whole THC content thing. Working in a few dispensaries, that has been a pet peeve of, I guarantee you, almost every bud tender that's ever existed. Because it's not something that, like, yes, it matters, but no, it's not the number one thing. Like, if you don't know what the entourage effect is, you need to look it up, because it's a huge thing. Somebody said this to me, a patient said this to me about 6 months ago, and I've kept it with me since. So if you think about THC versus like the terpene profile, let's say like the THC content is your vehicle, right? So a vehicle can get you anywhere you want to go, just depends on how you get there, right? So the terpene profile is going to be the driver of that vehicle and the terrain that you take. So it could be like a quick buzz, and then all of a sudden it fades away really quickly. Or, you know what I'm saying, it could be something that slowly creeps up and helps with pain and helps you, ease yourself to sleep. It could be something that helps boost your mood throughout the day when it makes you jump your work in the middle of the podcast. There could be, a bunch of different things, and it depends on every person's, like, chemistry is different. So what works for me might not work for you. Somebody else, one of my favorite customers, and I'll always remember them, was somebody who consistently asked about the 1-to-1 ratio when it comes to the CBD content versus THC, because they wanted all the medicinal benefits, but they didn't like to get high, but they like to smoke it. So it was one of the more difficult patients to walk through with. But
Sure.
At the end of the day, they know what they want, and we, as a cannabis industry, need to provide that to those patients. And education is a huge part of that too. So I think
I still love just pure CBD, and you don't need a card to get that. And so people can still benefit, but THC is the most well-known. And so being a new market, I think, people are focused on that, but hopefully in time, the customers will be more informed and, look for more products with CBG, CBN, a full terpene profile, and can figure out really, what they prefer and what works for them the best.
I had some CBN gummies, and I took one of those things, and I was sleeping for like 10 hours a night. It was crazy.
Means it works.
No, right. It works for some people, it doesn't work for others. So can't make that claim. It'll work for everybody. But Alyssa, do you want to start, because you're a little bit more versed when it comes to some of the stuff, and you've done a little bit more research. Some of these other bills that we haven't mentioned, I know there's a couple on there that you were really adamant about, and I think, kick us off. Let's go.
Yeah, well, there's a handful of them. So HB 1053, that one would prohibit practitioners from certifying pregnant women for medical marijuana cards. Coming from a clinic background, personally, I can say that I've literally seen practitioners turn people away. So I don't think that it's necessary to write that into law.
Well, it was breastfeeding too, right? So, like, if you openly said that you were if you breastfed your babies, then you.
It's another example of them trying to fix a problem that doesn't exist. We haven't heard of this problem. And sadly, it really puts a microscope on people in really vulnerable situations. Like, by and large, nobody needs to recommend cannabis to someone who's pregnant. But think about what are that one person who maybe is epileptic and the seizure could actually risk the life of their baby. And so I don't think anyone should be in between the doctor and their patient in those situations. As a guy, I stayed out of that debate entirely, but thankfully that bill didn't even move forward from day one. So very kind of quickly it got stopped, thankfully. And I believe there were some pretty passionate women who spoke out against it and just said it's really bad precedent and it's not a problem right now. So yeah, it's totally against that bill.
Yeah. And then let's see. I know HB 1102 was withdrawn, so we don't really need to talk about that. And then HB 1129 and 70. Wait, which one was 29?
I think 29 and 72 were the two that just were defeated.
Yeah.
So those were going to make it harder for doctors and nurses.
Yeah, and so those two, but like obviously, like I was out there on social media, like contact your legislators. You know, like, do you think that was effective? Like, do you think that there was like hundreds of calls like going to the legislature?
I'm not sure. This year has been a little quieter than last year and the year before, because as time goes on, some people are giving up and some people are just tuning out. You know, it's not necessarily 100 calls that defeats a bill, but it's 1 or 2 calls of a very heartfelt story to a lawmaker can really make a big difference. So I think my perception is that that Senate committee basically looked at those bills and said, you know what, we do have a medical board in place that deals with doctors that don't follow the law, and this problem hasn't come up yet. If it does, you can file a complaint with the medical board. And a lot of the language in those 2 bills were already in law, so it was just redundant and just adding more layers of restrictions and requirements. So I think it was just viewed as unnecessary. We have 7,000 patients today, not a single adverse reaction, not a single doctor disciplined for bending the. Hopefully those bills didn't make it, past that committee.
And not only that, but no black smudges when it comes to dispensaries or anything either. We haven't heard anything negative other than a little bit of gray information coming from the state. But we released a separate episode on that. We don't want to talk about that here. But one thing that kind of caught my eye, I think it was the one regarding the Oversight Committee. So I think
the law enforcement.
32. Yeah.
Yeah, there's 2 of them.
32.
Well, there's that and 134. And so 132 just adds like a topic that the committee needs to look at, which is like clinical studies regarding medical cannabis. We don't really have a position on that bill. It's kind of a whatever. It's just adding like whatever. And I think it's kind of dumb because the committee's not going to get into research studies and clinical studies. And that ties into SB1, which we can talk about. I'll address that separately. But the 134, I believe it is about who's on the committee. That one I'm working really hard to amend, because basically right now we have a committee that's supposed to oversee legislative recommendations for the medical marijuana program, and it is stacked with folks who are not sympathetic to patients, for law enforcement officers, lawmakers. Someone was supposed to be appointed to have experience in regulating or implementing medical marijuana rules. Who did they pick? A pharmacist with 0 experience in medical marijuana. And then there's only one representative of industry, and that's for a testing lab. But the person who has that seat, it has a lab background, but decided not to go into cannabis. So again, kind of irrelevant or counterproductive. So we're trying to amend that bill. They're trying to add more law enforcement. And my comeback was, okay, I don't care. Put law enforcement on it. I've been on these committees before. I can work with everyone, but you're going to put at least one license holder of each license type. So we want one dispensary owner, one manufacturer, one cultivator, and one testing lab. And these folks need to be with licensed businesses.
Yeah, be active.
And then we'd like to see, at least a patient on there. And they also are asking to put 2 doctors on there. And again, I said, okay, you want doctors on there? That's fine. But at least one of those doctors be active involved in providing medical cannabis recommendations. I don't just want to see 2 doctors added who are fundamentally opposed to it. So as long as there's balance, I can work with the opponents. In fact, we have to. We live in the same world with them, but they can't stack it against us. So hopefully we'll either stop those bills on the committee or amend them to the point that they'll actually bring more balance to the committee, and that wouldn't be a bad thing.
No, absolutely. Go ahead.
I mean, personally, I think, well, adding law enforcement to the committee adds a huge like black cloud of scariness, right? Because people are already really concerned getting their medical cards to begin with, because they're, it's been so illegal for so long, right? And then when you throw a bunch of law enforcement in there, because it's a drug enforcement agent and
even a school resource officer.
There you go. So, like, why? If it's a medical program, why do we need to have mandated officers from specific departments there? Like, to me, like, if they wanted to have some type of law enforcement presence in anything, like, maybe this is a wild theory or idea, but maybe the county sheriff, right? Because they're elected officials, or just any law enforcement officer. If they want to have somebody on there, why does it have to be so specific? Like, why not just
What's
anybody?
funny is the law enforcement people that usually get put on these types of committees don't even want to be on it themselves. They're just doing it because they were told they have to, but you'll talk to them after the meeting and they're like, I don't want to be here. This is a waste of time.
Not only that, but when it comes to the law enforcement official, right? So somebody who's a law enforcement official has probably abided by the law their entire life, right? And they get asked, I know this because I was a military police officer in the National Guard, you get asked, have you ever done drugs? And cannabis is a drug and was, seen as legal at that point, until just recently. So I highly doubt they have any positive experience with it, only the negative effects, and 90% of that is crimes due to the fact that it's illegal. So the possession, and then you get somebody who is an asshole to the cop because he doesn't want to get arrested for weed. Like, there's no reason to have somebody on there when it comes to law enforcement in that type of aspect. If it were me, what I would say is have somebody within the jails be on there and be like, look, these are people that are filling our jails, filling our cells, and they're not violent people. They are, if anything, gaining more problems by being in jail over something so petty and treated the same as it were if it were a more serious drug. So I think if anybody, it should be corrections.
Some of our greatest allies in the legislature have actually been retired judges. Once they retire and they kind of start to reflect on their career, and they look at the laws, there were 2 judges in the Senate last year that voted with us on everything. And they were some of the most open-minded and also the most well-spoken on the criminal justice system. So it is good to have allies, from those professions. And once they retire, sometimes they can look at things a little differently rather than once they're, when they're on payroll, or if they're higher up in the organization. Like, I find your average street cop really doesn't care anymore. In fact, I think a lot of them probably support it. They can't talk about it. It's the ones higher up, the paid political cops, and think about the decades of incentives from the drug war. I mean, these guys, and I have got respect for them, of course, but the laws that they were given to enforce created this culture. And then there were federal grants for so many years based on how many drug arrests you can do in your community. And so asset forfeiture is another thing. So many police departments across the country, got a whole new fleet of vehicles, got a new storage shed, got a boat to take on the lake, all these things that they seized from drug dealers. And so it's interesting. These incentives have been put in place to perpetuate these policies. Whether the cops personally think it's a good law or not, they're benefiting from it financially. And don't even put it on the industry. That's even worse. When you've got companies that are publicly traded, that literally their stock becomes more valuable the more people get arrested. Of course, they're going to lobby for stiffer drug laws, and it's just been a cycle. And honestly, most of the country and most of the world has started to reverse that. It's a few places like South Dakota and Mississippi that are still really proud of locking people up for long sentences. But for me, leaving and coming back, it's like two different worlds. I mean, I've got friends in Colorado right now working at one of the state's first licensed psychedelic therapy centers there. And I'm like, oh my gosh, you guys are in such a different world, because I'm just trying to get it. I'm just trying to get it so people don't go to jail when they pee in a cup and they got THC in their pee. And you guys are using mushrooms to help people like get through PTSD. You're only like, 1,000 miles away, but oh my gosh, South Dakota's been in a little bit of a bubble, for better or worse. I do love it here. It's why I'm here working on this, and you guys are too. But it is crazy to think, though, there's so many other places that figure this out, and we're still trying to figure it out.